The last thing I want to talk about today is women's roles and the presence of women in the cultural world. There are two phenomena that strike me as being fundamentally contradictory, or appear to be fundamentally contradictory. One is foot binding. And in the 19th century, when a new wave of Western missionaries, now Protestant missionaries, came to China, this was one of the things they most abhorred. But there's another phenomenon that Western observers didn't notice, but which begins in this period. And that's the expansion of women's writing and publishing. The fact is that there were more women writers who were being published in China than there were in all the rest of the world combined, probably through the 18th century. There's a website, and we have a link to it. It's called the Ming Qing Women's Writers website. It will give you access to lots of women's writings, particularly their poetry and their lives. And we hope you'll explore that website. So let me go to these two phenomena, foot binding on one hand and women writers on the other. Foot binding, and you see here slides showing, and rather unsettling slides showing a bound foot, has been understood in various ways. Why does it spread? We can trace it back to the Song. We know that in the 18th century it's really spreading very quickly, not only among the elite, but down to common people as well. And it's in the late 19th and early 20th century the government really tried, in fact, even into the mid-20th century, the government is trying to wipe it out. There are voices of literati opposition to foot binding going back certainly to the 17th century, if not earlier. Well, there have been a number of evaluations of foot binding which are not, I think, explanations. Perhaps the most horrid is the notion that foot binding was something that men did to women to keep their wives from running away, which is simply not true because it wasn't men who were doing it, it was women who were doing it. Another is that foot binding was part and parcel of the general oppression of women in Chinese society. And in fact, to extend that further, it was part of the general oppressiveness of Chinese society by forcing a deforming fashion on women. The fact that people thought it was attractive, that women felt that they were not attractive unless they bound their feet, that it was a mark of Chinese elite woman status. This is set aside, and we see it instead, we tend to see it as a sign of oppression. I think that it's difficult for us to take that position today in American society when we see people who are so willing to have their bodies pierced in many ways and to have tattoos over their whole body. From a relativist's point of view, right, it's hard to argue that this is simply a sign of the oppressiveness of Chinese society, unless we want to argue that deforming fashions that deform the body in the West, are just as oppressive. The real question, I think, for us is both why does it spread and why does it stop? And the why does it spread part is difficult. It seems that it probably has to do with literati status, women's status, that it's a sign of women, eventually of women willing to take on hard challenges. It's not a pleasant thing to do. It hurts. Young girls don't like it. We also know that many times in many places, women, once they get married, stop binding their feet. It's not necessarily a permanent status. It does not break the bones. It deforms the tendons in the foot. Why does it stop? Perhaps because it spreads. That is, once it no longer is a marker of elite status, the elite no longer may value it. But I do not have answers to this. Let me talk about the other side of women's presence in society, and that's women as writers. Women begin to publish their literary writing, especially poetry. Now, that's controversial. Writing is one thing. Publishing it is another. Publishing it is taking the work by people who are supposedly live their lives within their home, with their relatives, and especially with their female relatives, and putting it out there for everybody to see. And moreover, since poetry is so much about private emotions, it is taking one's private life and making it public. And yet there's a defense of this. Not only is there a defense, anthologies of women's writings are put together and published, and families start to publish the writings, the collected writings of their own daughters and wives. It becomes a source of pride. Now, there are old examples of women's writing, going back to very early times of women who are scholars and who write. But there had never been a moment in Chinese history, as far as we know, when so many women are writing and publishing their work, and it becomes such a topic of conversation. In fact, we have one count that says that we know of at least 3,556 published works by women from the Qing dynasty, the dynasty that follows the Ming. There's another aspect to the role of women's presence in literature, and that is women as role models. Not simply as objects of desire, but women as models of moral rectitude. The strong woman who stands in contrast to the weak man, for example. The smart woman with a dumb husband, and so on. So women's roles are changing in popular literature. Roles are changing in refined literature as well. But why this happens is a more difficult question, and I do not have an answer to that.